English-speaking heads of state on Earth? Well, there is a small group of world leaders who speak English at what you could call native level fluency, which is to say they have an ability to speak English so comfortably and so casually, there's basically no difference between them and a native English speaker, except for maybe a slight accent. But in most cases, the leaders who can speak English this well usually have some special excuse. For instance, one of the most extreme examples would be Krišjānis Kariņš, the current Prime Minister of Latvia. Check out how well he speaks.
We in the east of Europe, in the Baltics, for us, occupation ended only 28 years ago. So we very much remember what it means not to live in freedom, not to have the freedom of movement, the freedom of capital, the freedom of enterprise.
And here's his excuse. He's actually American. You see, Prime Minister Kariņš was born in the United States and grew up in a Latvian-American household, speaking both Latvian and English. He didn't actually move to Latvia until he was in his 30s, after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania. A similar case would be good old Benjamin Netanyahu, the current Prime Minister of Israel.
What I ended up doing was to trim the public sector, help the private sector, and remove the barriers to competition, which I still have to do. I fight regulation with machetes.
He immigrated to America from Israel with his family when he was a little kid, and as a result grew up speaking both Hebrew and English. Like Prime Minister Kariņš, he also went to college in the US, in his case MIT and Harvard. When Netanyahu was in his 20s and 30s, he moved back and forth between Israel and America, mostly working in jobs that involved American-Israeli relations in some way. Then he got involved in Israeli politics, and he's lived in Israel full-time ever since. Regardless of what you think about Netanyahu, the fact that he is as good at English as he is has undoubtedly been an asset in his political career, given how much Israel relies on the US for support. It certainly made it easier for him to get in arguments on American news shows, at least.
And not an answer to the question. Do you have them or do you not?
There are a few other world leaders who received a fairly elite education in either the US or Great Britain, and speak very good English as a result of that. This list would include the Prime Minister of Greece.
And I think this sends a very positive signal that traditional center-right parties in Europe, provided they have the right agenda, can actually win elections. They can beat the populists.
The Prime Minister of Singapore.
I would not say that the North Koreans will do anything the Chinese want them to do. I mean, big countries know that small countries can be quite obstreperous.
And the President of Croatia.
We also share the Mediterranean coast, the coast of the Mediterranean, the responsibility for peace and security in the areas.
That last bit of footage, by the way, was of her at a press conference with the Prime Minister of Israel. English was the only language that either leader spoke at that thing, which is something that is now quite common at bilateral summits of this sort. The leaders of some small European countries where the native language is quite obscure tend to be quite good at English as well, including the prime ministers of Holland.
At the end of the day, the choice for the president in the US is up to the American people.
Sweden.
Russia is contesting the basic rules and norms of international coexistence.
And Norway.
Developed countries are not meeting the target on health because we have too many people who are not getting treated for mental illnesses, for example.
But this is also a little bit predictable, given that Holland, Sweden, and Norway are also ranked as the first, second, and third best countries on Earth when it comes to speaking English as a second language. If you've ever been to one of these countries, in fact, it is quite remarkable just how good your average person is at speaking English. When I was there, I found that asking someone, "Can you speak English?" is a bit like asking, "Can you read?" It's seen as incredibly condescending and insulting because of course the answer is yes. Okay, now let's talk about a couple of more famous world leaders, ones who are a little bit more of a household name. Vladimir Putin, the head of Russia, is fluent in English, although he prefers not to speak it in public. Very nationalistic leaders sometimes don't like to speak English in public out of national pride. They want to be seen as being 100% faithful to the traditions of their culture 100% of the time, and I would think that Putin falls into this category. Putin did speak a fair bit of English in the run-up to the 2014 Sochi Olympics, however. His voice in English might be a little bit different than what you might expect.
Would give the many people and peoples living here more confidence by underscoring the value of their aspirations to live and develop in the framework of the highest standards of present-day civilization.
Angela Merkel can speak English, but she is not great at it, which is kind of unusual because Germany is a country where English fluency tends to be quite high. It might be because she grew up in communist East Germany, which was pretty closed off to the outside world. In any case, whenever Merkel does speak English in public before an international audience, she usually only speaks a very little bit of it and apologizes that she's not very good at English, and then switches to speaking through a German translator for the rest of it. For example, when she spoke to the UK Parliament,
as naturally I can express my thoughts better in my native language, I hope you will forgive me for delivering the rest of my speech in German.
Or when she gave an address to the US Congress.
Denn damals war es außerhalb meiner Vorstellungskraft, überhaupt in die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika reisen zu dürfen.
This strikes me as a good example of the sort of humility that people sometimes say that women have, which is to say a woman is much more likely to be self-conscious of her limitations, whereas a man is much more likely to just barrel through. For example, compare Merkel to someone like Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. You could easily say that he's no better than Merkel at English, and possibly even a little bit worse, and yet he still gave his entire speech to the US Congress entirely in English.
The 21st century has brought a series of new threats and new challenges that our ancestors might not ever have imagined.
We could say the same of Trump's old pal Shinzo Abe, who often speaks English in public, despite obviously struggling with it.
However, Japan's agriculture has gone into decline over these last 20 years.
Narendra Modi, the nationalistic Prime Minister of India, tends to avoid speaking English in other countries, although I assume he must speak it a fair bit in India. I know that English is a bridge language even within the context of India just because they have so many different native languages, but Modi did give a speech to the Australian Parliament that was entirely in English.
But it is the people of Australia who have made Australia what it is today.
And of course, he held a big rally for Trump in Texas a few months ago, and that was obviously all in English too.
He has left a deep and lasting impact everywhere.
It's always been a bit surprising to me that the popes are not that great at English, given what an international job they have.
Even amid conflicts and in the here and now of each day, to draw upon our deepest cultural reserve.
With its words of Isaiah quoted by St. Paul, I warmly greet each of you, bearers of wisdom, and through you, the staff, students, and families of the many and varied institutions of learning that you represent.
But that might just be a symptom of the amount of time that they have spent in Italy, which is generally ranked as one of the lowest European countries when it comes to English fluency. All right, and how about world leaders who have no English skills? Like I said, the vast majority of world leaders can speak enough English to get by, but there exists a very small group of world leaders who can basically speak no English at all. Either that, or they speak so little English, or they speak it so weakly that they just never ever do it in public. President Xi, the leader of China, doesn't seem to speak any English. I haven't seen any clips of him speaking anything other than Chinese in any context ever. Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, also doesn't seem to know how to speak any English. He doesn't even seem to understand it. You can see in this recent press conference with President Trump, he has to use the live translation thing in his ear. That is something that a lot of foreign leaders do not do these days. Even if they're not comfortable speaking English when it is their time to talk, they will at least listen to the other guy speaking English. I am not sure if old man Erdogan in Turkey can speak much English. He never speaks it in public, not even when doing interviews on American TV.
I am an open politician and I'm an open leader.
But on the other hand, there was this infamous episode in 2015 in which he was part of this public forum where one of the other guests was the old president of Israel, and everyone was speaking English except for him. But when things started to get pretty feisty, it seemed pretty obvious he could understand what was going on.
1 minute.
1 minute. Well, you know, 1 minute. 1 minute.
Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's all well and good for this English-speaking guy